If you are listening to these words right now, there is a reason you were drawn here. Not by chance, not by an algorithm, but by a quiet question that has been echoing inside you, perhaps for years, one you never fully put into words. A question about why certain connections feel electrifying, almost destined, while others quietly dissolve. A question about why some men pursue with intensity, only to disappear the moment closeness arrives. And most painfully, a question about whether something inside you has been unknowingly participating in this cycle. There are moments in life when a single look feels heavier than 1,000 conversations. When someone's presence stirs emotions that seem to rise from nowhere, ancient and familiar at the same time. You may have felt it, the sense that someone was meant for you, that the connection was profound, almost fated. But here's the truth few are willing to face. Intensity is not the same as depth, and obsession is not the same as love. What happens when that powerful connection is not returned in the way you hoped? When despite your openness, your sincerity, your emotional availability, the other person does not truly choose you. This is where most women begin to blame themselves, questioning their worth, their attractiveness, their timing. Yet the real forces at work are far more subtle and far more dangerous than personal inadequacy. Carl Jung uncovered a psychological pattern so unsettling that most modern relationship advice avoids it entirely, not because it is false, but because it exposes something uncomfortable about desire itself. Jung discovered that many men do not initially fall in love with a woman as she truly is. They fall in love with an image created within their own unconscious. And the tragedy is this: the stronger the initial intensity, the greater the likelihood that what he feels is not love, but projection. This is not romantic language. It is psychological reality. When a man appears overwhelmingly devoted at the beginning, when he says he has never felt this way before, when he places you on a pedestal, when his emotions seem to arrive too fast, too deep, it often signals not emotional maturity, but unconscious inflation. You become the surface onto which his inner world is projected. And once reality begins to interfere with the fantasy, withdrawal becomes almost inevitable. This is why so many women experience the same painful pattern again and again: passionate pursuit, emotional intensity, promises that feel eternal, and then, without warning, emotional distance, confusion, and abandonment. The connection collapses not because you changed, but because the illusion did. Most women never learn this. They spend years trapped in cycles of hope and heartbreak, convinced that if they love harder, give more, or pull less away, the outcome will change. But without awareness, every attempt only strengthens the unconscious forces already at play. Jung understood something fundamental about the male psyche. Men carry within them an ancient longing for mystery, distance, and the unattainable. This longing is not rational. It does not respond to logic or reassurance. It lives in the unconscious, where desire is shaped not by reality, but by absence. When a woman pulls back emotionally, psychologically, or energetically, she unknowingly becomes a blank screen. Into that emptiness, the male psyche begins to pour its ideals, fantasies, and unmet inner needs. The distance does not repel him, it activates him. It allows his unconscious to create a perfect version of her, one no real human being could ever sustain. This is where attraction turns into obsession. And here's the painful truth most women are never told. When a man becomes intensely attached after you withdraw, he is not responding to who you are. He is responding to what he imagines you to be. He is falling in love with his own inner image, not with your lived reality. The moment closeness removes the space required for fantasy, the projection collapses. And when it does, confusion replaces desire. Think back to your own experiences. How often did you sense that a man wasn't truly seeing you, but an idealized version of you? How often did you feel pressured to live up to an image you never consciously agreed to represent? That discomfort is not imagined. It is the friction between reality and projection. Jung called this inner image the anima, the unconscious feminine within the male psyche. When a woman remains distant, unavailable, or emotionally undefined, she becomes the perfect vessel for this projection. The man does not encounter her as a person, but as a symbol. And symbols, while powerful, are incapable of sustaining real intimacy. This creates one of the most destructive traps in modern relationships. The man feels deeply alive, inspired, transformed in her presence. He believes he has found something extraordinary, but what he has actually encountered is his own unconscious longing for wholeness. The woman becomes the mirror through which he imagines his salvation. The tragedy is that once the woman steps fully into reality, once she becomes present, available human, the spell breaks. The projection has nowhere to live. And without understanding why, the man withdraws, often leaving the woman questioning everything about herself. This dynamic is not limited to unhealthy men or dysfunctional relationships. It operates silently beneath awareness in ordinary people who believe they are seeking love. And unless it is brought into consciousness, it repeats itself endlessly. Emotional distance creates scarcity. Scarcity creates perceived value. The psyche confuses rarity with worth. What is always available feels ordinary. What is withheld feels precious. This mechanism is ancient, primitive, and deeply embedded in the unconscious. It explains why genuine affection is often overlooked, while unpredictability becomes irresistible. But this is not a strategy to be used. It is a pattern to be understood. Because the moment a relationship is built on projection rather than reality, suffering becomes inevitable. Obsession replaces intimacy, intensity replaces stability, and when the fantasy dissolves, abandonment follows. The most important question you must ask yourself is not how to make someone desire you more, but whether you are being seen at all. Are you loved for your presence or pursued for your distance? Are you valued for who you are or idealized for what you represent? True connection begins only when projection ends, and this is where our journey deepens. In the next part, we will explore why the unattainable becomes irresistible, how emotional scarcity rewires desire, and why the unconscious equates distance with meaning. What you will discover may challenge everything you've been taught about attraction, but it may also free you from patterns that have quietly shaped your love life for years. At some point, attraction stops being about the other person and begins revealing something unsettling about ourselves. This is where most people turn away because what they encounter is not romance, but psychology stripped of its illusions. When emotional availability decreases, desire often increases, not because love has grown, but because the unconscious has been activated. There is a primitive equation buried deep within the psyche. What is scarce must be valuable. What is distant must be important. What cannot be easily reached must contain something essential. This logic does not belong to reason. It belongs to survival instincts formed long before modern relationships existed. And yet, it quietly governs desire even now. A woman who is consistently present, emotionally open, and sincere may offer stability, warmth, and care. But paradoxically, these qualities alone rarely ignite obsession. Meanwhile, a woman who withdraws, who becomes unpredictable, who creates emotional gaps, often triggers a level of fascination that feels irrational, overwhelming, and uncontrollable. This contrast confuses many women because it seems to reward distance and punish honesty. But the truth is darker. The fascination is not with her presence, but with the space she leaves behind. That space becomes fertile ground for fantasy. When emotional certainty disappears, the mind rushes to fill the void. The unknown invites interpretation. Silence invites meaning. Distance invites imagination. The man begins to construct narratives, explanations, and hopes around the woman who has become emotionally unavailable. He is no longer responding to what she gives, but to what she withholds. And the more ambiguous she remains, the more powerful the projection becomes. This is why emotional scarcity can feel intoxicating. It gives desire something to chase, something to resolve, something to conquer. But what is being pursued is not the woman herself. It is the tension she creates inside the man. Jung recognized that when desire intensifies under conditions of withdrawal, it often signals the activation of an archetype rather than genuine connection. Archetypes are not personal experiences. They are inherited psychic patterns shared across humanity. When triggered, they override individuality and turn real people into symbolic figures. One of the most powerful of these is the archetype of the unattainable feminine, the figure who seems just beyond reach, untouched by ordinariness, carrying the promise of transformation. When a woman pulls away, she unconsciously awakens this image. The man does not simply want her. He wants what she represents: completion, transcendence, escape from inner fragmentation. This is why some men describe these connections in almost mystical terms. They speak of fate, destiny, spiritual awakening. They say they have never felt this alive before. But what they are experiencing is not intimacy. It is an altered psychological state. The unconscious has taken control, flooding the system with intensity and meaning. The danger lies here. Archetypal attraction feels deeper than real love, but it is far more fragile. It cannot survive closeness. It requires distance to exist. The moment the woman becomes fully known, human, imperfect, emotionally present, the archetype collapses, and with it the intensity fades. This creates one of the most painful paradoxes in modern relationships. The woman believes she is being deeply loved, while the man believes he has found something extraordinary. Yet neither is actually relating to the other as a real person. They are relating to projections shaped by absence. You may recognize this pattern in men who tell you that you changed, when in truth, you simply became real. Or men who lose interest once emotional safety replaces uncertainty. Or men who feel suffocated not because you demand too much, but because the fantasy no longer has space to breathe. There is another layer to this dynamic, even more disturbing, that Jung called the shadow. The shadow contains the parts of ourselves we reject, suppress, or deny, our insecurities, fears, unmet needs, and unresolved wounds. When a man becomes obsessively drawn to a woman who withdraws, he is often confronting his shadow without realizing it. Rejection activates old wounds. Distance reawakens the fear of not being enough. Emotional unavailability mirrors earlier experiences of abandonment. Instead of avoiding these feelings, the psyche becomes magnetically drawn to the very situation that triggers them. It is as if the unconscious believes that by winning the love of the one who withholds it, the original wound can finally be healed. This is why some men fall hardest for women who reject them. Not because rejection is attractive, but because it resonates with something unfinished inside them. The pursuit becomes compulsive. The attraction becomes charged with desperation. And the relationship becomes a battlefield between longing and fear. Jung described this as a wound that seeks the same blade. The psyche repeats painful patterns in the unconscious hope of resolution, but repetition does not heal. It only deepens the cycle. For the woman on the receiving end, this can feel overwhelming. Intense attention, emotional declarations, a sense of being needed at a profound level. But beneath it lies instability. Because once the man feels he has secured her love, the inner tension that fueled the obsession dissolves, and without tension, the attraction collapses. This is why relationships built on emotional scarcity often burn bright and die fast. They are powered by unresolved wounds, not mutual presence. They feel transformative, but leave devastation behind. The most unsettling realization is this: none of this has anything to do with your worth. You are not too much. You are not boring. You are not inadequate. You simply cease to function as a projection surface. Understanding this changes everything. Because once you see that obsession thrives on distance and illusion, you stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You stop chasing validation through withdrawal. And most importantly, you stop internalizing someone else's psychological process as your failure. But there is still one final layer that must be understood, one that explains why this dynamic feels so powerful, so addictive, and so difficult to escape. It lies in the deepest process Jung ever described, individuation. In the next part, we will explore how men unconsciously use women as mirrors for their own inner development, why some relationships feel like spiritual awakenings, and how to recognize when you are being loved versus when you are being used as a reflection. This is where awareness becomes liberation. There is a moment in every intense connection when something inside you begins to feel strangely off. Not dramatic enough to leave, not obvious enough to name, but persistent enough to quietly disturb your peace. You sense that you are no longer being met, only perceived, not known, only interpreted. And in that moment, without realizing it, you may have stepped into one of the most powerful psychological roles a woman can occupy in a man's inner world: the mirror. Jung called the process behind this individuation the lifelong movement towards psychological wholeness. For men, this path often requires confronting the parts of themselves that were suppressed in the construction of a masculine identity: vulnerability, emotional depth, intuition, receptivity. These qualities live in the unconscious as the inner feminine. And when a woman becomes distant, undefined, or emotionally unavailable, she unconsciously activates this process. She becomes the reflective surface through which the man begins to encounter his own disowned interior. This is why some men say they feel more themselves around you, more alive, more connected to something meaningful. It is not because you completed them. It is because your distance allowed them to project their unlived inner life onto you. You became the doorway to a part of themselves they have never fully explored. But this role is dangerous, because when a woman is unconsciously used as a mirror for someone else's individuation, she is not loved as a person. She is used as a psychological instrument. The man does not relate to her reality. He relates to what she awakens within him. And once that awakening occurs, once the inner work begins, her role is no longer necessary. This is why some men change dramatically during these relationships. They gain confidence. They pursue new goals. They feel transformed. And then, inexplicably, they leave. The woman is left confused, depleted, questioning what went wrong, while the man moves on, unconsciously carrying forward the parts of himself he discovered through her. The most painful part is that the woman often believes she failed to maintain the connection, when in reality she fulfilled the role perfectly. She mirrored him back to himself. And once that function was complete, the dynamic dissolved. This is not love. It is unconscious development disguised as romance. There is a subtle but crucial distinction here. In a healthy relationship, two people grow together through mutual presence. In a projection-based relationship, one person grows through the other's absence. The first creates intimacy, the second creates imbalance. You may recognize this if you have ever felt that a man was more in love with how he felt around you than with who you actually are. Or if he described you as inspiring, transformative, awakening, yet struggled to show up consistently, emotionally, or practically. These are not compliments. They are clues. The unconscious does not speak directly. It speaks in symbols, sensations, and intensity. And now comes a truth that may feel uncomfortable, but is essential for freedom. This dynamic does not belong to men alone. Women project too. Jung warned that just as men project their inner feminine onto women, women project their inner masculine, the animus, onto men. What feels like love at first sight is often the collision of two projections. Two people seeing not each other, but the unconscious figures they carry inside. This explains why some connections feel immediate, overwhelming, and destined. The psyche recognizes not the person, but the symbol, and symbols ignite far more force than reality ever could. But symbols cannot sustain daily life. They collapse under intimacy. They resist ordinary human presence, and when they dissolve, disillusionment follows. If you are honest with yourself, you may see how this is played out in your own life. The relationships that began with fire and ended in confusion. The men who idealized you, pursued you, elevated you, then suddenly withdrew once closeness arrived. The connections that felt transformative yet left you emptier than before. None of this means you are unlovable. It means you were unconsciously participating in psychological dynamics you were never taught to recognize. Awareness changes the pattern. When you understand that distance fuels projection, you stop mistaking withdrawal for power. When you see that intensity often signals illusion, you stop equating obsession with depth. And when you recognize that being idealized is a warning sign, not a compliment, you reclaim your reality. True love is not mystical. It is not euphoric. It does not require you to remain undefined or distant to be desired. Real intimacy grows through presence, not absence, through being known, not imagined. This does not mean attraction disappears when projection ends. It means attraction becomes grounded, slower, quieter, and infinitely more stable. The woman who no longer functions as a mirror becomes something far more rare, a real human being. She cannot be consumed, idealized, or used for unconscious growth. She must be met, and not everyone is capable of that. This is why awareness feels lonely at first. Once you see through projection, you can no longer unsee it. You recognize the signs early. The excessive idealization, the obsession triggered by distance, the fascination with mystery rather than substance, the language of transformation without responsibility. These are not signs of love. They are symptoms of unconscious processes seeking expression. The turning point comes when you stop asking how to be desired and start asking how to be met. When you stop managing distance to maintain attraction and begin embodying presence to invite truth. When you choose to be real, even if it means fewer connections, because the ones that remain are no longer built on illusion. In the next part, we will make this understanding practical. You will learn how to recognize when you have become someone's projection screen, the 5 warning signs that reveal illusion disguised as love, and how to protect yourself without closing your heart. This is where knowledge becomes discernment. Once you become aware of projection, you start to notice patterns that were always there but never had language. What once felt romantic now feels revealing. What once felt flattering now carries a quiet warning. The psyche always leaves traces. You just have to know where to look. One of the earliest signals appears as idealization, not appreciation, not admiration, but elevation. He speaks as if you are different from all others, as if you exist outside the ordinary rules of human nature. He tells you he has never met anyone like you, that you awaken something in him no one else ever has. At first, this feels intoxicating, but beneath it lies a subtle erasure. He is not curious about your contradictions, your limits, your complexity. He is attached to an image of perfection that cannot survive reality. This idealization intensifies when you remain emotionally undefined. The less he knows, the more he assumes. The more he assumes, the more invested he becomes. But what he invests in is not you, it is his own construction. And no matter how careful you are, you will eventually fail to live up to an image you never created. Another sign emerges through obsession triggered by distance. The moment you pull back, his intensity increases. Messages multiply. Gestures escalate. Declarations grow dramatic. What looks like passion is often anxiety activated by unconscious fear. This is the most dangerous phase because obsession can easily turn into control. Not because he wants to know you, but because he needs the projection to remain intact. You may notice how his desire peaks when you are unavailable and fades when you are present. When closeness arrives, something in him grows restless, distracted, or cold. He may say he feels confused, overwhelmed, or unsure. What he is actually experiencing is the collapse of fantasy under the weight of reality. There is also a magnetic pull toward mystery. He is fascinated by what you do not say, what you withhold, what remains unclear. Instead of asking, listening, and learning, he imagines. He constructs stories about what you think, what you feel, who you are beneath the surface. The real you becomes secondary to the idea of you. And the more defined you become, the less interesting the projection finds you. In these moments, you may feel unseen even as you are intensely desired. You are present but not encountered, desired but not understood. This contradiction is one of the most emotionally draining experiences a woman can endure. Then comes what many mistake for the deepest sign of love, the claim of transformation. He tells you he feels alive for the first time, that everything makes sense now. That being with you feels spiritual, transcendent, life-changing. These words carry enormous weight, but they do not describe a relationship. They describe an inner psychological event. You are not being loved. You are being used as a catalyst. This altered state feels powerful because it is archetypal. It bypasses reason and floods the nervous system with meaning. But like all altered states, it cannot last. When the chemical and symbolic intensity fades, disillusionment follows. And often, so does withdrawal. The final sign is the most devastating, yet the most clarifying. Once the distance disappears, once you are fully chosen, fully available, fully real, the intensity evaporates. Interest wanes. Presence diminishes. Sometimes affection turns into irritation or even repulsion. The man may not understand why he feels this way, but the reason is simple. The projection has collapsed, and without it, he does not know how to relate. This moment often leaves women questioning everything. Was it all a lie? Did he ever care? What did I do wrong? The truth is both simpler and more painful. He cared deeply for an image that could not survive reality. Recognizing these signs is not about becoming cynical or guarded. It is about developing psychological literacy. When you can name what is happening, you stop internalizing it as personal failure. You stop chasing clarity from people who are lost in their own unconscious, and you stop mistaking intensity for truth. This awareness also forces a difficult reckoning. You may realize that some of the most powerful connections in your life were never mutual, that you were deeply involved while the other person was psychologically elsewhere, that you were offering presence while they were seeking reflection. And yet, this realization is liberating because once projection loses its mystery, it loses its power. You no longer feel compelled to manage distance, perform mystery, or withhold yourself to maintain desire. You become free to be present without fear of abandonment, free to be known without shrinking, free to choose connections rooted in reality. This is the deeper promise of Jung's insight. Not control over attraction, but liberation from unconscious patterns. Not manipulation, but clarity. Not intensity, but integrity. Imagine a relationship where you are not idealized or diminished, but seen. Where closeness deepens attraction instead of destroying it. Where being real does not end desire, but grounds it. This is not fantasy. It is simply rare in a world driven by unconscious projection. The next step is crucial. Awareness alone is not enough. Without integration, old patterns return quietly. In the final part, we will confront the deepest layer of this dynamic, childhood wounds, emotional addiction, and how to step out of the cycle entirely. This is where understanding becomes choice. At the deepest level of this dynamic lies something even older than attraction, older than romance, older than conscious memory itself. It is the first emotional bond a man ever knows, and the first wound he ever carries. Jung understood that when obsession is triggered by distance, it often has nothing to do with the woman in front of him, and everything to do with a loss that occurred long before she arrived. Every boy must separate psychologically from his mother in order to become a man. This separation is necessary, but it is never painless. It leaves behind a quiet imprint, the longing for unconditional acceptance, the memory of being completely seen without effort, without performance. When this bond is disrupted, through emotional absence, inconsistency, or rejection, the wound deepens. It does not disappear. It waits. Later in life, when a woman creates emotional distance, that wound awakens. The obsession that follows is not directed at her as a person. It is a desperate attempt to heal something ancient, to finally be chosen, to finally be enough. The man is not pursuing love. He is reliving a childhood injury, hoping this time the ending will be different. This is why the pursuit can become extreme. The nervous system does not distinguish between past and present when trauma is activated. The fear of abandonment floods the body. Desire becomes survival, and the woman becomes a symbol, not a partner. The cruel irony is that when she becomes fully available, the tension that sustained the obsession dissolves. The wound no longer feels exposed, and without exposure, there is no urgency. Interest fades, not because the wound healed, but because it was no longer being stimulated. This cycle is chemically addictive. The highs of pursuit, the closeness of bonding, the pain of withdrawal, they create a loop stronger than logic. Many relationships remain trapped here for years, mistaking intensity for intimacy, addiction for connection. And here comes a truth that is difficult to admit. Some women sense this dynamic and unconsciously participate in it. Distance becomes a tool. Withdrawal becomes leverage, not out of cruelty, but out of fear of being left if they are fully seen. But this strategy keeps the relationship locked in a neurotic loop. It can never mature into something real. Jung's answer to this dilemma was radical in its simplicity. The way out is not better strategy, better distance, or better control. The way out is consciousness. When unconscious patterns are brought into awareness, they lose their grip. When you see that someone's obsession is about their wound, not your worth, you stop taking it personally. When you recognize projection as it arises, you no longer feed it. And when you refuse to become a mirror for someone else's unfinished inner work, you reclaim your own wholeness. This is the true power of psychological insight, not to manipulate attraction, but to free yourself from it. True love does not depend on mystery. It does not require distance to survive. It does not collapse under closeness. It grows through presence, consistency, and mutual recognition. It may feel less dramatic, less intoxicating, but it is stable. And stability is not boredom. It is safety. Imagine no longer questioning why someone pulled away, no longer replaying conversations in search of meaning, no longer shrinking or withdrawing to maintain desire. Imagine choosing relationships where you are not idealized, not consumed, not abandoned, but met. This is what becomes possible when you stop being a projection screen and start being a person. What you do with this knowledge now matters. Insight without action fades. Patterns return when awareness is neglected. But once you have seen the mechanics of projection, you can no longer unknow them. Your nervous system begins to recognize the difference between obsession and intimacy, between fantasy and presence. This understanding contradicts much of what mainstream advice teaches. It is not about playing hard to get. It is not about maintaining mystery. It is about refusing to build love on illusion. There are countless women right now trapped in cycles of idealization and abandonment, blaming themselves for dynamics they did not create. They remain unaware of the forces shaping their experiences. You are no longer among them. If parts of this journey reflected your past or present relationships, you are not alone. Recognition is the first step toward liberation, and sometimes sharing awareness is an act of quiet revolution. The most important question is no longer how to attract someone, but how to remain aligned with yourself while being loved. How to choose connection over compulsion. How to build something real in a world addicted to illusion. This is the essence of emotional maturity. This is the heart of Jung's wisdom, and this is the path HeartSync X exists to illuminate. You were never meant to be someone's fantasy. You were meant to be met in your full humanity, and when you choose that, everything changes.